Can you see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to move this, Melissa?
3, 2, 1.
Oh, we're live. Wow.
We'll do it live.
Okay. We ready?
We're ready.
Okay, here we go. Everybody's on. We're over here. We're on 3 different phones recording right now. So if for something happens, if you're on Facebook and something happens there, you can switch over to our Instagram account and vice versa. So lots of things for you to look out. I'm Aaron Collins. We have a team, Collins Real Estate Team, for Bernie, San Antonio, really Sabor area. And you should have gotten a tax appraisal from your county that would send what they think is going to be the value of your property, and then they're going to base your taxes and what you owe. And so every year you get the chance to appeal those taxes, and we brought in an expert, Ryan. Ryan has done this for many years now and has a ton of Google reviews. His company website is protesttax.com.
Yeah.
And so he's going to walk us through some slides. At the end, if you've got questions and you're online, you can type those in at the end, and we'll try our best to get all of them answered. That's how we'll handle it. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you.
And let you go.
I appreciate the introduction. I know we had some phones, so I won't try to move around too much so you're not playing cameraman the whole time. But thank you for the introduction. My name is Ryan Cohen. I am a local attorney licensed by the state of Texas. I have an office in San Antonio that we protest appraised values of properties. That's all we do now. As time has gone on, that part of our business has grown and grown. A lot of repeats, a lot of referrals. And so what used to be a few months a year has kind of taken over the entire year. So we really just focus on that. So I'll run through some slides. It won't be too long. I don't want to bore you guys with a bunch of law and tax information, but the more information is better, especially to equip you if you decide to go and do your protest yourselves. And so the most beneficial part of this is that I'm here, and if you have any questions, please let me know. If you don't have any questions that we get to today, we can send me an email, give me a phone call, and I can connect with you at a later time. So let's run through this. Introduction. I'm from San Antonio. I know if you're from San Antonio, you kind of have to tell where you went to high school, right? That's kind of like a San Antonio thing. I went to Clark. I went to Leon Springs Elementary though, so that's pretty close. I graduated from UTSA. I went to A&M School of Law up in Fort Worth. So I got my Aggie ring. I have a practice in San Antonio, and last year we protested over 1.7 billion in market value. Most of that's residential. I know some other firms have tens of billions, but it may be just a handful of properties, you know, big towers, arenas, whatever it might be. We focus on mostly residential and commercial. So last year we did 1.7. This year we'll probably have close to 2.5 billion in value. And then just a quick disclaimer, even though I am an attorney, this is not legal advice. All of the information I tell you today can be found in the Texas Property Code, the Tax Code, the State Controller's Office, and the Texas Constitution. Just had to throw that in there. Okay, cool. So today's topics, so we'll talk about exemptions really briefly, because exemptions and property taxes kind of go hand in hand. And I know a lot of people have questions about exemptions. First, we'll talk about introduction to property taxes, and then we'll move on to appraisal methods, how do you file a protest, and then the protest timeline. And again, if you have any questions, you can stop me and ask, and we can chat about it, but if you want to save your questions till the end, I may answer it in the meantime. So let's run through this real quick. All right, so introduction on property taxes. Why do we pay property taxes? Why are they so high every year? Well, Texas has no state property tax and no state income tax. What does that mean? When you get your tax bill at the end of the year, there's no line item that says state of Texas 1%, right? All of the local taxing units that tax you, maybe city of Bernie, maybe city of San Antonio. If you're outside the city limits, great, you pay a little bit less. And then what they do is they collect property taxes, they set tax rates, and that's what is used to provide for schools, streets, roads, police, fire protection. That's how we pay for a majority of our municipalities and local governments here in the state of Texas. And Texas law requires that property values be equal and uniform, highlighted, underlined, because that's kind of the overall theme, right? When you go to a protest, you want to make sure that you're not paying more than your fair share of property taxes, and then want to make sure that your property value is appraised fairly that you're not being appraised higher than your neighbor, even though y'all have the same property, same square foot, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So this is the tax calendar. I'll mention a few things on this tax calendar. This is provided by the comptroller's office, but the very top is January 1st. That's the first date that the calendar really starts. And January 1st is an important date because values are supposed to be appraised as of January 1st, right? So if you're in the middle of building a home and your property was 80% complete on January 1st, and then it's completed and you move in March, well, you want to make sure that the appraisal district doesn't have your property for that tax year at 100% complete, right? Even though you get your notice in April, it may show, wow, yes, I just bought it, whatever. But you want to make sure that they have it at 80% because they are required to appraise your value as of January 1st. So all the issues with your property that you're collecting for evidence, the closer to January 1st, the better. So the first part is called the appraisal phase. That's when the appraisal districts are going out into the field, looking at your property, making notes. They may go inspect properties. If it's a new build, they may actually go into the property and sketch it themselves. And then there's determining how much of an appraised value they're going to place on your property. And then they send those notices in April, right? They'll send you that notice of appraised value April 1st, sometimes a little bit later. And then May 15th is usually the protest deadline. That's another important date, right? So they send those notices in April. During May, June, July, August, the summer month is the equalization phase. That's when we're at the protest hearings, trying to get your value lowered, fair and equal with your neighbors. And then taxes are assessed, right? They can't send you a tax bill until they know how much value they're placing on your property. And then taxes are collected, right? So we really handle this part right here, the equalization phase is the protest hearing. And it's kind of a backwards process if you think of it, right? What we're doing is we are protesting the appraised value that's gonna be used on the tax bill at the end of the year. So our goal, and if you're doing this yourself, your goal is to get your value down as low as possible so that tax bill at the end of the year is as low as possible, right? If you don't protest your appraised value, that tax bill is gonna show whatever value they noticed you back in April. Does that all make sense? Okay, cool. And then what happens is tax bills come out in October. If you have a mortgage, usually they'll pay that when it's due, usually January of the following year. So for 2025 purposes, the tax bill that comes out in October, the lender will make a payment usually January 31st. If you don't have a mortgage, if you get that tax bill in October, you can usually pay it in full by, I think January 31st, or you can split up in 2 payments if it's your homestead, I believe. And if you're over 65, I think there's also additional payment options that you can take advantage of. And deferring payments as well, but that's enough of that. So let's move on. So exemptions, really quick. Exemptions are just tools to lower your property value. The most common exemptions are that homestead exemption, the homestead over 65, there's a disability homestead, and the disabled veteran homestead. You all have the word homestead because a lot of these you have to actually have as your homestead property to be able to qualify for them. There are other exemptions, but the most important thing about this slide is make sure you have a homestead exemption. If you have any friends or family and they own property, it's easy to check. You can just go to the appraisal district's website. If you search for your property, it should say HS homestead, and that is confirming that you have a homestead on there. Homestead exemptions have actually been improved lately. It used to be, I think, $25,000, but now it's gone all the way up to $120,000. So Texas legislature has increased the exemptions amount. And briefly on that, the school district is the biggest tax rate. So if your tax rate's 2%, probably 1%, half of it is your school district tax rate. And what the homestead exemption does is it reduces the assessed value by $120,000, I think right now. I think it just moved from 1 to 120. So if your home's value is $500,000, instead, if your tax rate for your school district, it'll be $400,000. So we'll take it down by $100,000, save by $1,000 or so. So it's important to have those on there. And then the over 65 exemption, what that does is it creates a tax ceiling. So I always tell my clients that the year you turn 65 is the most important year to protest, because what it does is it creates that tax ceiling, essentially meaning that the amount of taxes that you pay that year, it's not going to go above that. There are a couple smaller taxing units that don't care about the exemption, and you may see nominal increases. But really, the over 65 creates that tax ceiling that keeps your taxes as low as possible. And it's the year you turn 65. So if your birthday is December 31st, you'll get the benefit of the exemption for the entire year. You don't have to wait until you turn 65 to apply for it. Every appraisal district's different. Kendall County, we're here in Kendall, they don't have a system in place, or last time I checked, they did not have a system in place where it automatically kicked on. You'd have to reapply the year you turn 65. In Bear County, when you applied for a homestead, they put your birth date in, so their computer systems automatically turn it on the year you turn 65. So just double check that, right? Don't think that, oh, I'm turning 65 is automatically getting it in place. Just confirm it with your district. Last thing I'll say about this is it's not too late to file a homestead. If you haven't filed it yet, you can file it at any time during the year. And at the top, it will say, are you filing a late application? Yes. Tax year is applying, you can go back 2 years. And you'll actually get a check in the mail from the tax assessor for your overpayment those last couple of years that you haven't had the exemption in place. So that's very important. Okay, that's basically the gist of homesteads, but we'll revisit in just a second. So appraisal methods. How is the appraisal district appraising my property? Well, usually one of three methods. It's usually the market data, the sales approach, income approach, and the cost approach, right? So the district is required to be appraised at market value as of January 1st, right? January 1st, what was the market value of the property? And what is market value? It's the value that it would transfer for cash or cash equivalent on the open market, highest and best use, maximizing your gains, right? That's the definition of market value. And so these three approaches are how the district will appraise your property depending on what type of property you have. If it's a single family property, our home that we live in, they're going to use this first approach, the market data, sales. What are the sales in your area? What is the market looking like, right? If it's not your, let's say it's an office building, they'll probably use the income approach. What are the rents? What is the NOI? What are the financials of the property? And then lastly is the cost approach, which is usually used for new construction. So you can use the cost approach for a single family home if you just built it. We argue that as well. And then the income approach, usually again, those are for apartment buildings, office buildings, anything that generates income or doesn't really fit into the other two categories. And so here is, and I'll zoom in on the next slide, but here's my notice of appraised value. And what I didn't do, what I always do, is I always start at the beginning. So I'm sorry, how many of y'all have filed y'all's protest before or have done protest hearings in the past? Okay, so y'all are somewhat experienced. And for the people that haven't, no worries. That's good that you'll have some knowledge though. So this is my notice of appraised value for my property back from 2024. When I made this slide, notices hadn't gone out yet, but how many of y'all have property in Bear County? Do any of y'all have Bear County? Okay. And y'all are in Kendall County, I'm assuming? Okay. So y'all's notices may look a little different than this, but essentially it's the same thing, right? The notice of appraised value is telling you, it's required to tell you what your value was the year before and what they're proposing for this year, right? And they'll tell you some other information. They'll tell you when the protest deadline is, when they'll begin hearings. They'll tell you all of the taxing jurisdiction, taxing units that are gonna tax you. And then they'll tell you whether you have exemptions or not, right? And so on the next slide, we'll actually zoom in on this part right here, which is this part, right? And so I know I said I wouldn't mention homestead exemptions, but I'm back, okay? So last year, I'm gonna say last year, let's pretend this is 2023. In 2023, my value was $525,000. And 2 lines above that, it says total market value $525,000. So my appraised value was my assessed value. The number in bold is assessed value. It's a little misleading, and I always ask the appraisal district to update their notice of appraised value, because it says the third line towards the bottom says appraised value $525,000, and then 2 lines above that says total market value $525,000. Well, the line that says appraised value should really say assessed value, right? That's the amount of value that I'm actually getting assessed on. 2 lines above that, market value is the appraised value of the property. So it's a little misleading. But what the homestead exemption does, besides reducing the amount of taxes that you pay, it also creates what's called a homestead cap. which means that the assessed value cannot go up more than 10% year over year. You may have heard, I heard they can't raise my taxes more than 10%, right? Well, that's true if it's your homestead. They can raise your appraised value 100%, but your assessed value, what you're actually paying taxes on, cannot go up by more than 10%. So initially, when I got this notice in the mail last year, they wanted to appraise my property at $581,530, which was more than 10%, right? So what I was getting capped at was $577,500, exactly 10% more than $525,000, right? So they could have told me my value was $1 million, but I would have still been capped at that 10% increase, right? And so that's exactly what they did. They raised my value by 12%, whatever that is, but I was capped at the $577,500. And then after a protest, I got that 581, because that's the value that you're actually protesting, the appraised value, down to 543, right? So I was below the cap, so that means my appraised value was my assessed value. This is a little bit of tricky, and it may take a few minutes to understand, but essentially, the homestead cap only applies to homestead properties, and it's the difference between your assessed value and appraised value. If I had not protested in 2024, my appraised value would have said 581, 530. My assessed value would say 577, 500. And right here, I would have had about $5,000 in homestead cap, which is really the difference between the two numbers. So it's important to understand this, because when you go to a protest hearing, you may have a huge homestead cap, right? In 2021, values shot up 50, 60%, and I feel like they haven't really gone down quite a bit. So I was protesting properties that were being appraised at $500,000, but were being assessed because they've had a homestead for so long and they've kept their value low at $300,000. So they had a $200,000 homestead cap, right? So it's important to know this, because what value are we protesting? Well, we're protesting the appraised value. You know, we're trying to get that value down as low as possible. If we don't get it below the assessed value, then you're still paying whatever they were going to appraise you at or assess you at. So does that all make sense? Okay, and if you really don't get it, we'll do some more math later. But essentially, you want to make sure that you understand your notice of appraised value, what they're actually appraising you at, what they're actually assessing you at. And again, this only applies to homestead properties.
Can I?
Yeah, interject at any time, please.
So what that means is you might actually get them to lower your appraised value, and your taxes will not change. What you owe them will still stay the same, because you didn't get it below the assessed value.
Exactly.
The assessed value is the one that they calculate what you owe them every year on.
Exactly.
But it's important that you still protest your appraised value.
Yeah.
Are you going to get to that, or is this?
Yeah, I mean, it's still important to protest, because if you don't protest, it's hard to go back down, right? Our job is to, you know, theoretically values increase every year, but what we're trying to do is really limit that increase. And even if you don't get it below the assessed value, it's still important to file that protest, because it helps for the next year's argument. And this cap that we've experienced over the last few years is really going away this year. Values have finally caught up 10% every year after 3 or 4 years. They're finally going back down to what, you know, the appraised values are. So we've had to deal with the homestead cap issue for a few years, but you know, if you had a homestead and they're more than doubling your appraised value, there's a guarantee that you're being assessed at a lower value because of the cap. Okay, we'll run through these last few slides real quick. Okay, so you get your notice of appraised value. Now what do? You got to file a protest, right? You got to do it before the protest deadline of May 15th or 30 days after the appraisal district has mailed the notice. So sometimes the appraisal district doesn't mail it on time, and they won't mail it out until, let's say they do it right now. Your deadline would be the end of May, essentially. And so some deadlines are later, but for good measure, I always say to file a protest by May 15th of every year. And you are supposed to file a protest in writing, but if it's your homestead, you can file it electronically. Every appraisal district should have a portal for you to log in, and they may give you a PIN to file your protest online. But if you do file your protest by mail, I always say to send it by certified mail. You want a copy, make sure that you did get it in time, because it is that hard deadline. If you try to file it after May 15th, it's going to be very difficult for you to open a protest. Besides that, we can move on from here. So This is an actual copy of a notice of protest from Bear County. I always reference Bear County because they provide this to you. And I know Kendall County also, I think, provides the notice of protest with the notice of appraised value. Most counties do. They send you everything together. But we'll run through this. So this is Bear County's. Kendall's may look the same, but there's a couple items that they actually put in red for you that you want to check off. Near the top is the informal conference. You want to be able to speak with an appraiser informally about your protest, about your property. And you also want to check off the evidence requested box. You want to be able to look at the evidence that the district is using to justify the value that they're placing on the property. Besides that, you'll fill it out, go through each section. Under section 3, you have to list a reason why you're protesting. If you don't, they will probably tell you to select one. But the first checkbox is the incorrect appraised value or value unequal with others. Those used to be 2 separate reasons. Bear County put them together because everyone argues them. Kendall County, I'm not sure whether or not they keep those together on the notice of protest. But the incorrect appraised value is the market aspect, and the value unequal with others is the equity argument. So you get 2 different arguments. You're looking at the market and you're looking at the equity. What's the difference? Well, market is market sales, right? What are the market sales telling your property is worth? The equities argument is, okay, we're not looking at market sales, we're looking at your neighbors. Properties on your street, are you being fairly assessed or appraised with your neighboring properties? And so those are the 2 arguments. You'll actually get 2 different evidence packets, one from the district to show you what they're doing for market and one for equity. And you want to look at both because those values may differ, right? And so you want to be able to ask for that evidence, and they'll provide it to you within 14 days of your hearing. Besides that, you'll want to check off if you are going to go to a formal hearing. You can do it by in-person, by Zoom, by telephone conference. But what all this means is, you're filing your protest, and then they'll schedule you to speak with an appraiser informally if you ask for it. And that's your best chance to work with an appraiser one-on-one to try to get your value lower. If you can't settle informally, then they'll schedule you for that formal hearing. And it's not scary. It's pretty, I'm not gonna say pretty relaxed, but it's not like you're in a courtroom, right? They may act like they're the judge, but it's not, intimidating to say the least. And so this is the notice of protest. You just want to make sure, again, the most important thing about this is you've got to file it in time or they'll deny it, right? Okay, so we'll move on from that. And then so as we mentioned, there are multiple reasons why you can file a protest. You always want to check that first box or the first 2, the incorrect market and the equity arguments. We don't file for our clients anything other than that, but I have had clients say that they've denied an exemption, especially ag exemptions. Maybe they took it off. They may have requested more information. You never filled out the form. They took it off. That's a big deal. Failure to provide notice, errors in the appraiser roll, denial of ag use. But the 99.9% of protests are the first reason that your value is unequal. Again, we just kind of mentioned this. So after you file a protest, you'll be scheduled for your informal hearing. That's one-on-one with an appraiser. That's when you present your evidence, you agree to a value. If you cannot agree to a value, or if you can agree, you'll sign a settlement and you're done, right? Whatever value that you agree to, that will be used for your appraisal for that year. If you don't settle, you'll go to a formal hearing. That's instead of me working with an appraiser to try to come to a value, it's me versus the appraiser, and y'all 3 are the ARB members. I present my case, he presents his case, I get a rebuttal, he gets a rebuttal, y'all will ask him clarifying questions, and then y'all will make a determination of value. And if I'm not happy, I can file a lawsuit, judicial review, or we can request arbitration if you qualify. I would say hold off on the last 2, the judicial appeal and arbitration, because there are costs involved in that. And usually those are reserved for clients that have a lot of skin in the game, right? You're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential tax liability. Do some cost benefit analysis. It may not be worth to pay a $250 arbitration fee if you're really gonna only save $250 at an arbitration, right? It may be a wash. But the first 2 are the ones that we are in all the time. And for us, the informal for us looks a little different from you guys. we have a lot of cases, and so we work back and forth with an appraiser quite a bit to try to settle the case. And if we can't, for some reason, the appraiser just can't agree to the value that we're asking for, we'll go to formal hearings. We're in formal hearings all summer long. So, yeah.
Can I say something about Kendall County?
Yeah.
So, in Kendall County, I've done the informal every time the last several years. I've never gone to the formal. My goal, I'm not there to fight with the appraiser. In fact, they're just doing their job and they want to serve us well. And for the most part, they have always wanted to find a good settlement in that room. They're very, they work really well with us. So I go in there with a thankful attitude and try and work with them. I present my case to them, and I've always had them drop my value every time. So it has worked well to just be in it with them.
Absolutely. That's one of the main things is they want to work with you, but you've got to be courteous. You've got to provide some evidence, and we'll talk about evidence here shortly. But, you know, we try to settle because most of the time we can get a better reduction, especially in Kendall County, an informal hearing than a formal hearing. It just really depends on the personalities in the room, really. I can walk into a formal hearing in Kendall County and they've already made their mind up, right? They don't care what my evidence is gonna be. They're buddies with Jim or whoever is at the appraisal district who they see every day, who they share lunchrooms with. And so they'll usually tend to agree with them. So you kind of have to know your audience at some places. But you know, they're supposed to be impartial, yada yada. So it may not feel that way. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you filed you got your notice of appraised value, you filed your protest, you've got an informal hearing coming up. How do you prepare? Well, you want to make sure you bring some evidence. For residential properties, for market sales, you want to bring sales, right? We have software that creates our evidence packets, but for you guys, I think y'all know a realtor or a team of realtors that could, I don't know how willing y'all are. Some realtors don't want to provide evidence from sales data, but you can also do your own evidence. You can find sales data, right? But you want to be able to provide sales that are relevant within the past year in first quarter, right? So for 2025 protests, any sale that happened last year in 2024, plus the first 3 months of this year are relevant, right? So you don't want to bring a sale that happened 3 years ago and say, hey, my value should be this, they just sold this house. That's not material. But if you bring some sales within the past few months, then they'll look at it, right? They'll take that into consideration. Texas is a non-disclosure state, but you can guarantee if it was a market transaction, it was on the MLS, they know the sales price. They have third-party vendors that they pay for that provide all of this access to them. So besides the market data, you also want to provide personal evidence, right? Our whole goal at a protest hearing is to paint your picture, paint your property in the worst light possible, right? We want to say all these issues are wrong with my property. I've got cracks in the foundation, I've got a water issue, I've got flooding, my home, they're building something behind my house, right? So they don't know your property. They can't go to thousands of properties every year. So you want to be able to provide that evidence to them. The most common evidence that we get from property owners are photos of property damage, estimates for repairs, electrical issues, plumbing issues, backs to commercial, et cetera, et cetera. And then for commercial properties, we have the income approach again. We're gonna look at the property owner's financials, NOI. Usually what happens is it's kind of like pulling teeth with those property owners. Sometimes they don't want to share their personal financials. So we'll look at the district's financials. If they have higher vacancy rates or maybe the cap rates aren't really up to date, we can argue and mess with some numbers, right? Just changing 1% here and there makes a big difference. So this is a new slide that I just added this year because this is from Bexar County, right? In Bexar County, it doesn't apply to Kendall County, but they decided that in September they made a public notice stating that any property that was successfully protested this year, they're gonna use that value to notice you at this year. So all of my clients that I got values that lowered last year, they kept those values the same, which is great, right? We don't want values to go up every single year. But our argument is, great, you kept it the same, it should be lower, right? So we want values to go down. And the district kind of knows that values are gonna go down for a couple of years now with this reappraisal plan. And so essentially what they're saying is beginning in 2025, Values resolved through informal and formal ARB hearings will be used for 2026, and same for 2024 to 2025. So it's interesting. You know, there's always new legislation, it seems. They're increasing exemptions amounts, they're coming up with new reappraisal plans, and so we don't really know what's gonna happen this year. I will say that this seems to be holding true. A lot of the values that we did achieve last year, they have noticed them the same, but some of them have gone up. So it's kind of the same. I threw this in there, but nothing's really changed. Values go up, values go down, values stay the same. We'll file a protest no matter what happens. And we'll try to get your value down as low as possible. So this was new. We'll see what happens and how this plays out. Okay, I'll kind of wrap it up. What we do is we'll handle everything for you. Here's my little sales pitch. So my company is Protest Tax, and we charge only if we're successful at reducing your appraised value. There's no upfront fee. Our fee is based on how successful we are at reducing your appraised value, and it's 25% of your estimated tax savings before exemptions. What that means is, let's say your tax rate's 2.5%, and we reduce your value by only $10,000. Well, a $10,000 reduction times 2.5% is $250. Our 25% fee would come out to $62 and change. What else we do is what a lot of other companies don't do is we cap our fees. So if you have a homestead, we cap our fees to $150. If you have an over 65 exemption, the most we'd ever charge you is $65. And we did that because those homestead caps, remember? In 2022, when values shot up like crazy, I was getting really good reductions. I was doing great work. But I wasn't saving these people the thousands of dollars that they would have saved if they didn't have those homestead caps in place. And so it wasn't fair for me to charge people and say, oh, by the way, you didn't really save, right? So how well did we do? Well, it's still the same. We're protesting your appraised value. We're getting as low as possible. If you have exemptions in place, that's great, but our job is to reduce that appraised value as low as possible. So even though the caps are going away, we're still capping our fees to $150. We also work with a nonprofit called My City is My Home. We do hundreds of pro bono protests for free. We actually just partnered with another nonprofit in Dallas, so we've got a lot of pro bono protests in Dallas that we're doing this year, which is great. But if you do decide to protest yourself, please, at least one time if you check the process out. But if you do, stick to the facts, don't get emotional. They want to work with you, and they will, as long as you're courteous, provide evidence, and give them some reason to reduce your appraised value. So besides that, I think the last page is just my firm's information. What's more. So yeah, that's my company, protesttax.com. Ryan at Protest Tax. You can sign up online instantly. You'll just fill out some information and get a little cool digital signature. We just updated our website. I bought this domain, Protest Tax, when I was in law school back in 2012, I think, 2013, because I was at a class and my professor brought in somebody who did this in the DFW area, because Texas A&M School of Law is in Fort Worth. And so she had like Dirk Nowitzki's home and Emmett Smith's home. I thought it was like really cool. I didn't know anything about protesting property taxes. I've never owned a piece of property before. But during my one-all summer of law school, I came home and just did it for my family and friends. Thought it was kind of interesting. I was like, I'll buy the domain because maybe one day this will happen, right? So didn't do it for a while out of law school. Became a commercial litigation attorney. Was soul sucking, and I'm just behind a computer suing people and companies for millions of dollars, right? Which is never fun. And doing interrogatories and stuff like that. So I went out on my own in 2017. I did this for a while, and that part of the business has really picked up, where we've got about 5,000 different properties now, and growing. And it is a full-time business. We're able to have a couple of full-time employees. We're able to do some good with the nonprofit. And it's not difficult work, but it's a lot of hands-on, right? So even though we don't charge much, we really take it as from the homeowner's perspective. We understand that your taxes are important, and we want to get you your lowest value possible. Anything I didn't mention, please let me know, but usually at this point I'll open up to a Q&A. I don't know if anybody's put some questions online, or if you want, we can do some Q&As up front here. Yes?
So if you bought a house in an older neighborhood and there wasn't a lot of sales in that neighborhood, and so there wasn't a lot of market value to compare.
Yeah.
And you paid a little bit more than probably homes have sold in a long time. How long till we see that adjustment come up in your taxes?
Good question. So if there are not a lot of sales in your neighborhood, the district might expand their sales comps, right? So they may pull sales from here and there to justify your value, which is important. That's why you always want to ask for the evidence, because you don't want them using sales from outside the neighborhood. The property code or tax code does allow you to expand the number of months, depending if there's not enough comparable sales, to either 24 or 36 months, depending on the population of the county. But how long until they use that sale? That's a good question. So they really try to stick within that time frame. So if there's not a lot of sales, they'll pull other sales. They will create a sales grid to base your market value on. But then again, look at the equity side of things. So I don't, realistically, if you just bought a home and there's not a lot of sales, your value shouldn't be too crazy. It should remain about the same unless those sales that they do pull from outside the neighborhood would increase the value. But, that's a good question. I don't really know if I gave a great answer to that.
Well, if there's other homes in the area and they haven't sold, and particularly that house went way up, then it would be a little unfair that everyone in the neighborhood is paying less, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. But that's the thing, is they're probably not, because if a home sold in the neighborhood and they're able to then justify everybody else's homes to values to increase, that might happen, right? So, but that brings in two good points. This market is, as you probably know, it's very cyclical. It goes up and down. So they're supposed to look at what is actually sold on the market. I guarantee you this year, we're gonna bring a lot of active listings that have been sitting on the market for a long time, that are dropping their prices over and over, that haven't sold. So we'll be introducing a lot of that evidence. Secondly, I'm trying to get my thoughts together. I don't know what I was gonna say, but yeah, okay, so when there's a new development, there may be phase 1 and then phase 2, right? Like River Rock Ranch, there's 3 phases going on. So I've got clients that have 15-year-old homes in River Rock Ranch, and now their value went up like crazy because all of these new homes that are 10 years newer. So you wanna make sure that the neighborhood codes are correct, right? And you wanna make sure that you point to the district like, hey, you're appraising my property to my neighbors, but my neighbor's home is 10 years newer than mine. It's not fair, right? So the district isn't gonna get it right. And they're using computer systems and they've gotta plug in codes, and you don't know what they're gonna do, right? So it's not fair that your neighbors are paying less, but I can guarantee you, if you paid more for your home, your neighbors are probably gonna see their values increase as well. That's usually what happens.
Basically, all your neighbors are gonna be mad at you.
Yeah, but hopefully they have those, so that's why if they've lived there, they've got those homestead, they're capped at that 10% increases. But yeah, so that's why I keep going back to evidence. You wanna look at the evidence, but exactly, that's the main argument that my clients make, is my property value is going up like crazy. I'm like, yeah, because all the values around you are selling like double what they were 3 years ago, right? So, any other questions? Or did you have another question? Nope. Going once?
I'll do a question.
Yeah, sure.
So with the May 15th deadline
Yep.
to protest,
Mm-hmm.
when does someone need to hire you?
As soon as possible. So we're 2 weeks and 2 days away from the deadline, right? The sooner the better. We file our protest as soon as we get a client. But for Kendall County, let's say, you said you raised your hand for Bear County, so usually Kendall County, what we do in other counties, we're in 75 different counties, is we'll file it at 2 hard dates, May 1st, May 13th. So we want to make sure our first batch of protests go out on May 1st, and then the second one's on May 13th. We usually don't get clients after that. We're like, we're sorry, it's too late, too close to the deadline. More than welcome to file it yourself. If you do file it in time, you can hire us and we'll take over at that point. But we don't want to be responsible for filing a protest within 48 hours. So we always say May 13th is our hard deadline. But for Bear Counties, it's a little easier because Bear County, we have a portal and we can file it online as soon as you sign up. So it's a little bit easier.
So if I understood you correctly, if someone goes ahead and does the electronic protest or
Mhm.
starts that process,
Yeah.
then they can still come in and hire you?
They can, although it's a little more difficult for us to take over at that point, because if they do that, they may schedule you for a hearing. And again, so let's say you do file your own protest, and they've scheduled you, let's say you do that tomorrow, and they schedule you for a hearing in a week or two. We can still file our own protest. You can have multiple protests. You can file a protest for your property, you hire me, I can file a protest for your property. If you no-show your hearing, that's not gonna stop me from going forward with a protest on my own. So it's really no harm, no foul, but some counties are like, oh, they have to request the reschedule if you want to take over the account. And also some of them are not up to date on all the rules, where what I just explained, where I can file my own protest and continue with it, even if you no-show your hearing. But they're gotten more knowledgeable.
What do you recommend for the informal in Bear County, Zoom or in person?
I don't know if they do in person anymore. COVID kind of stopped everything, right? I used to go with these banker boxes to these hearings, right? And now COVID happened. I say now, it's like 5 years later, right? But when COVID happened, they didn't allow anybody in the appraisal district. So I would go back and forth by either by telephone or by email or by teleconference. But if you, and that brings up a good point. If you can go in person, right? There's nothing better than, it's a relationship-based business. Go in person, talk with these people. They want to see a face behind the property. We always go in person whenever we can. For formal hearings, we do go in person. Informal, we don't. Except in Kendall County, we do. But for Bear County, no. But that brings a good point, which I forgot to mention. If you do file your protest electronically in Bear County, when you file it, it will give you two options. It will say, first option, follow my protest and continue everything electronically, or second option, follow my protest only and then schedule some time to meet with an appraiser. Do the second option, because if you do the first option where you're only doing everything online, they'll give you an offer, and then that's it. That's your communication with them. You can either accept or reject. If you reject, formal hearing, boom, you're done. Second option, you get to go back and forth quite a bit. Like, no, what about this value? What about this value? What about this value? Okay, I can meet you here. So it's more important that you do select that option if you are gonna try it yourself, or especially in Bear County, to make sure that you don't do the online only option. So thanks for reminding me.
In Kendall County, they do give you the option to go through it all the way electronically
Mhm.
or ask for informal.
Yeah, so it's
ask
probably
for
the same
informal.
thing. So if they do prompt you with that, even though it sounds great, oh, I'm gonna do everything online, well, they're gonna say, here's your offer. Either accept or reject. If you reject, you'll be scheduled for a hearing. If you accept, you're done. And most of the time, that first offer is not a great offer, right? So, although we do file our process electronically, we have an appraiser that we've already told, don't even talk to me until after the deadline. Even though we filed thousands of protests, it's easier if we just file everything once. They give us one spreadsheet instead of trying to handle multiple different spreadsheets when things were filed. So, yeah, but to answer your question, if you are gonna hire us as soon as possible, if you do file yourself, we can still help you. It's just a little more challenging. And then if you do file it online, make sure you select that second option to not do everything online. Make sense?
I have a question from Instagram.
Okay.
So the homestead application said it applies to the property, has to be your home on January 1st. So can you apply the first year you're in the home?
So that might be an outdated rule. You used to have to live on the property January 1st for you to claim a homestead. In 2022, that law changed. You could file your homestead at any time. So it wasn't fair. It didn't make sense, right? You move into the home January 2nd. Why shouldn't you be able to claim homestead for 364 out of 365 days? Just didn't make sense. So the law changed in 2022. You can file for a homestead at any time. You'll get that prorated amount for that year that you're applying for it. It'll ask you, when did you move into the property? Or are you transferring an exemption? So the January 1st rule is outdated. You can apply for a homestead anytime as soon as you move into the property. But there are hard deadlines for the late application. I think it's January 30th. And what that means is, let's say you've lived in the property for 20 years, you've never had a homestead exemption. Well, let's pretend we're back January 3rd, right? I'm filing a late application, I can go back 2 years. But after January 30th, that second year now becomes, I guess, 2024, right? And now you're applying for 2024, 2025, 2026, right? So that deadline for when the homestead is due is really just to make sure that retroactively you're adding as many years as possible. But don't wait till January 1st to file a homestead. File it as soon as you can. You will have to update your driver's license or Texas ID that matches the address that you're claiming for the homestead. But get that done as soon as possible. Yes, ma'am.
So should we have received the 2025 tax statement already? Or is it just 2024?
So 2 things, let me talk to you about that. Verbiage is a little interesting. Tax statement. You won't get a tax statement what your tax bill is until the end of the year. You're probably referencing my 2025 notice of appraised value.
I haven't received anything out of it.
Okay.
We just got
this week.
ours
Oh,
Okay, so
yesterday or today, or
Okay, so that, I have
So
it in the
on-
mailbox today.
yeah, so that date, if you just got it, it's probably not May 15th, the protest deadline. It's probably like,
and actually one of our properties we actually haven't gotten yet. We
okay,
got 2 of them, but we haven't gotten the other one.
great. This is reminding me of stuff to
Okay,
talk
I just-
about.
I didn't
Okay,
know.
so 2 things about that. So the tax statements, you don't get until you get your tax bill, right? But your notice of appraised value, I just wanna make sure we use the right terminology, right? Your notice of appraised value, you should have gotten already. Maybe it's in your mailbox. But check this out. If the district, they're not required to send you a notice if your value did not increase by more than $1,000, your assessed value. So let's say your neighbor's property did get a notice of appraised value and they got it May 20th and their protest deadline's June 20th. Well, they're like, hey, you got a notice, I'm gonna file my protest. Well, guess what? You didn't get a notice of appraised value, your value didn't change, your deadline was May 15th, right? So if you don't get a notice of appraised value, just file a protest. No matter what, even if they haven't sent it out to you yet, file a protest for before May 15th because that will happen. They will say, oh, yeah, we didn't send you one because your value didn't go up, we weren't required to, so your deadline's May 15th. But we sent it out to 80% of the county and their deadline's June 20th. Well, unfortunately, that circumstance has happened before. And so for good measure, we file all protests by May 15th. Don't wait for a notice of appraised value to file a protest.
Don't go to the appraisal's office and ask for something or ask for one?
I don't, you could, they're probably just gonna,
Kick me out.
they're probably pretty busy, but you could probably go in there and say, I want a notice of protest form and do it, fill it out. They'll file stamp it, get your file stamp copy. And if they say, if they don't, you know, if they weren't gonna send you a notice anyways, if your value or your assessed value didn't go up, then your deadline would be May 15th.
Okay.
So you just wanna make sure you do follow that in time. A little tricky there. Yeah. That does happen. Any other questions on the Instagram, Facebook? No? I'm trying to think of common questions.
Well, I know they send you a survey, right? Where
Yeah, when you
need-
buy a
and
property.
Should you not fill that out?
That's a good question. So Texas is a non-disclosure state. So they're gonna try to find out your purchase price one way or the other. The most common method is they'll send, hey, what'd you buy your home for? I always say, don't fill it out. Why? There's no reason to fill it out. If your value, they notice you at, and it is way above what you bought it for, then you may want to disclose what you bought it for. That might be the only way to get it down to what you bought it for. But it, you know, I don't think it's gonna help you to disclose it, and it might not hurt you either. But you know, it might hurt you if they're like, oh, you just told me you bought it for $250. We were only gonna appraise you at $200, $250, right? So. Again, it's a mass appraisal system, so they're not supposed to do that, but they are supposed to appraise it at market value, and there's no better evidence for market value than a market transaction, a market sale. So yeah, surveys, don't worry about it. I get asked that question all the time. I say, don't answer it, you're fine. Not required. And business personal property, you may not know anything about that. I don't know much about it either. I don't do any business personal property renditions or protests. You can do business personal property renditions and protests. I'm sure you've dealt with that before, BPP. We just do real property, not business personal property. Any other questions, any other thoughts, comments? No?
Thanks for being
Yeah,
here.
I'm sorry, I feel like it went really quickly, but.
No, we're
No,
good.
that's
It's
good.
perfect timing.
Cool.
Hey, in case you didn't get it, this is information. Ryan does a great job, high integrity. I love that he said you can do it yourself, or he's happy to help. And it is a business, so legit protest guy right here will do a wonderful job if you want help. If not, call us. We're happy to help you do your own. If you need a CMA done, a comparable market analysis, we'd be happy to do that. Just reach out to us. I've had several people reach out to me already to do that. We'll send it to you. I'm not going to file your taxes or protest your taxes for you. That's what Ryan does, but I'll help you do it for you. So if you have any other questions, you can shoot Ryan an email, you can shoot us an email, call us, and we'd be happy to answer.
Cool, thank you.
Awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you.
Appreciate everyone. I've got some business cards in case you want to take one of these.
Perfect.
Fresh off the print.
And we also have t-shirts, if anybody wants